My name is Margaret Cole, and at 68, I thought I had finally learned what silence felt like. The kind of silence that settles into a house after your husband dies, after your only child moves out, after the phone stops ringing as often as it used to. But that morning, long before the sun rose over Harbor Crest, my silence shattered in the most unbelievable way. The security alarm on my phone went off at 5, not the soft chime I set for medication reminders or morning walks. No. This was the sharp, urgent tone the system used only when someone tried to enter my beach house without my permission. I sat up straight in the dark, the cold air brushing my arms as I reached for the screen. The guard on duty was already calling. "Mrs. Cole," he said, his voice careful, unsure. "There's a moving truck outside your property. A young woman claims she's your daughter-in-law. She says the house belongs to her now." For a moment, I didn't breathe. Jenna. Of course it was Jenna. The guard hesitated before continuing, as if trying to understand the situation himself. "She's insisting we open the gate, ma'am. Says she has paperwork." A strange calm washed over me, the kind of calm you feel when something you've suspected for months finally reveals its face. I slipped on my coat, poured the rest of last night's cold coffee into a travel mug, and told him what I had been waiting to say. "Let her in." I could picture her already, standing there with that bright, polished confidence she wore like perfume. I could picture the boxes, the movers, the smug certainty on her face. She must have thought she won. She must have believed she finally had everything she had been inching toward for years. As I drove toward the house, the headlights cutting through the fog, I felt a knot tighten, not from fear, not even from anger, but from something deeper, something heavier. Because this wasn't just about a house. It wasn't about paperwork or property or signatures. This was my own daughter-in-law trying to erase me while I was still alive, and she had no idea what she was walking into. By the time I reached the gates of Harbor Crest, the fog had thickened into a pale curtain that swallowed the edges of the road. My wipers moved slowly, clearing thin arcs on the windshield as I pulled up beside the security booth. The guard stepped out immediately, hands tucked inside his jacket, his breath clouding in the cold morning air. "She's still there, ma'am," he said as I lowered my window. "She keeps insisting the property is hers. I've asked her twice to wait, but she's getting impatient." I could see her now through the fog, Jenna, pacing near the moving truck, her arms cutting through the air in sharp, irritated gestures. 2 movers stood nearby, glancing at each other as if they weren't sure they were being paid enough to deal with this kind of mourning, even from a distance. Jenna's voice carried across the driveway, bright and commanding, the way she always sounded when she believed she had the upper hand. "Open the gate," I told the guard. My voice surprised even me. It was steady, almost too steady, as if I were reciting lines from a play I had rehearsed for months. He nodded and walked back to the booth, tapping at the keypad. The iron gate slid open with a slow groan. I drove through and parked along the side of the driveway, close enough that Jenna saw me step out of the car. Her expression shifted, something between confidence and the flicker of something else. Annoyance, perhaps, or triumph. She must have thought I wasn't going to show up at all. "Well," she said, crossing her arms as I walked toward her, "I didn't think you'd come this early. But since you're here, maybe this will go smoother." Her tone was forced sweet, the way she talked to elderly clients when she wanted to sell them a house above their budget. She held a folder against her chest, tapping her finger on it as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "This is unnecessary, Jenna," I said softly. "You should have waited." She laughed under her breath. "Wait? Why? The house is already ours. I'm just moving in what should have been moved in months ago." She lifted the folder slightly. "You signed it." "I don't know why you're making this dramatic." Behind her, one of the movers asked if they should start unloading. Jenna waved a careless hand at them. "Give me a second," she snapped, then turned back to me. "Honestly, Margaret, I'm doing you a favor. You'll be safer in Maple Ridge. This place is too much for someone your age anyway." I felt that sting, but I didn't let it reach my face. There was a time when those words might have shaken me. Not today. "I think," I said quietly, "you're about to realize how wrong you are." A car pulled up behind us, tires crunching over gravel. Jenna looked over her shoulder, annoyed at the interruption, but I already knew who it was. I had texted him on the way. My attorney, Thomas Reed, stepped out of the car, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had come prepared for a long morning. And just like that, Jenna's confidence flickered. Not gone, not yet, but cracked. Her victory was starting to slip through her fingers, and she didn't even realize it. I didn't always feel this steady. Before all of this, before the paperwork, the lies, the quiet manipulation that crept into my home like a draft I didn't notice at first, there was a time when I believed Jenna might actually become the daughter I never had. It started 2 years earlier, on a gray afternoon in Maple Ridge, when Michael called to say he was bringing someone for Sunday dinner. I remember glancing around my kitchen, suddenly aware of the dust on the top shelf and the way the house had grown too large for just one person. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my sweater and tried not to look as nervous as I felt. Jenna stepped inside with the kind of smile that fills the room before her voice does. She handed me a bouquet of tulips and told me she'd heard so much about me. Her tone was warm, practiced, but warm enough that I let myself believe it. I set the flowers in a vase, and the three of us sat down to a meal that felt almost like old times, as if the empty chair at the table wasn't there. She asked about my late husband, about the years I'd spent working in financial control for a logistics firm, about the duplex I rented out in Lakeview, and the little beach house my husband and I had saved for. She listened in a way that made me feel interesting again, seen again. I didn't notice how her questions always drifted toward property, finances, long-term plans. Back then, it just felt like conversation. Michael was happy, and that was enough for me. He'd always been the kind of man who apologized even when he wasn't at fault, the kind who let people talk over him because he hated confrontation. So when I saw the way he looked at Jenna, as if she filled some missing space in his life, I was grateful, maybe even relieved. In the months that followed, Jenna visited often. Sometimes she brought muffins or a scented candle she thought I'd like. Sometimes she just sat at my kitchen counter while I cooked and told me about a difficult client or the house she'd almost sold that week. I liked those afternoons. They made the house feel less empty. But every so often, something small would snag in my mind. The way she walked through the room slowly, as if memorizing where everything was. The way she asked about the price my husband and I paid for the beach house, then the value today, then how much equity was left on the mortgage. The way she touched my arm when she complimented me, her fingers lingering just a moment too long, the way real estate agents do when they're trying to soften a negotiation. I brushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was being unfair, paranoid even. Grief does strange things over the years. It settles, but it whispers. One evening, after Michael and Jenna announced their engagement, she hugged me tightly, almost too tightly, and said, "We're going to take good care of you, Margaret. You won't have to worry about anything." Her voice was sweet, but something in her eyes made my stomach pull tight, like a thread being tugged. Still, I chose to trust her. I wanted to. I wanted to believe my son had found someone who cared for him, someone who would bring warmth into the spaces I could no longer fill. But trust, I've learned, doesn't disappear all at once. It frays. It thins. It weakens at the edges long before it snaps. And mine began to fray on a night just a few months after their wedding, the night Jenna told me, with that same gentle smile, that maybe it was time for me to simplify my life and put one of the properties in Michael's name for ease. Her words were soft, almost loving. But something inside me went still. It was the first moment I realized Jenna wasn't just visiting my life. She was studying it, calculating it, and she was nowhere near finished. The shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet places, little pauses, small changes in tone, the way Michael's messages grew shorter while Jenna's presence in my life grew louder, more insistent, more demanding. At first, it was subtle. Michael used to call me every Saturday morning on his way to get groceries. It was our small ritual. He'd ask if I needed anything, and even when I said no, he'd bring over a bag of apples or a loaf of bread. After he married Jenna, those calls stopped coming. I told myself he was busy settling into married life, that I had no right to cling to a routine when he had someone new to build one with. But then weeks passed, then months. When I reached out to check on him, he replied late or not at all, and when he did answer, his messages sounded strangely cautious, as if someone were reading over his shoulder. Jenna still visited, but now her sweetness had an aftertaste. She started making comments like, "Michael worries about you being alone all the time," or, "It might be easier for everyone if we helped manage your bills." She said these things lightly, almost playfully, but the suggestion underneath was sharp. I told her gently that I'd been managing my own finances for decades, that I wasn't ready for anyone to take over. Her smile tightened, and she nodded as if humoring a child who didn't know any better. And little by little, Michael changed. He canceled dinners we'd planned. He forgot a doctor's appointment I asked him to drive me to. He stopped dropping by without warning, as if someone had convinced him that doing so would somehow offend me. The boy I'd raised to be considerate and gentle now walked on eggshells around his own mother. I didn't want to blame Jenna for it. But every time I saw how he flinched before answering her questions, how quickly he turned his phone face down when she texted, I felt a pressure building beneath the surface. The first real crack came when I stopped by their house with a casserole. I had made it because it was the dish Michael loved most growing up. Creamy chicken and rice, baked until golden. I thought it might be a small way to reconnect. When Jenna opened the door, she didn't try to hide her irritation. She pressed her fingers to her temple as if I'd interrupted world peace negotiations. "You should have called first," she said. "I'm in the middle of a virtual showing. This looks really unprofessional." Michael appeared behind her, his eyes darting between us, torn between stepping forward and stepping back. He didn't hug me. He didn't even reach for the casserole dish. Instead, he mumbled something about timing before Jenna shut the door with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the untouched casserole, and I felt something unfamiliar, something between grief and anger. It settled in my throat like a stone I couldn't swallow. I tried to ignore it. I reminded myself that marriages are complicated, that adjusting takes time, but ignoring a feeling doesn't erase it. It only pushes it deeper. A few weeks later, Jenna invited me to dinner at a new Italian place in the city. The invitation surprised me. She said she wanted us to clear the air and move forward as a family. I accepted because I wanted that too. But the moment I walked into the restaurant, I knew something was wrong. Michael was there, but he wasn't alone. Jenna's parents sat beside him, and her younger brother sat across from them, checking his watch. At the end of the table sat a man I didn't recognize, a neatly dressed, sharp-eyed man flipping through a leather folder. Jenna introduced him as the family attorney. I hadn't even sat down before the attorney asked how my memory had been lately. The room grew smaller. Everyone watched me, waiting, measuring, judging. I tried to laugh it off, to make a joke about misplacing my reading glasses. But no one laughed. The attorney spoke calmly, clinically, about early cognitive decline, about protective measures, about how families step in before things get messy. Then Jenna leaned forward, her voice soft and coated in concern. "We're only trying to help you, Margaret." In that moment, the truth didn't just reveal itself, it slammed into me. This wasn't a dinner, it was an ambush. And somewhere between the pasta plates and the forced smiles, I realized Jenna was no longer hinting, she was planning. And I was no longer a mother-in-law in her eyes. I drove home from that dinner with my hands shaking against the steering wheel. The city lights blurred through the windshield, smearing into streaks of gold and red. Every word they'd said echoed in my ears, the attorney's careful phrasing, Jenna's faux concern, the quiet nodding from her parents as if I were a burden being politely managed. By the time I reached my driveway, I felt smaller than I had in years, as if age had finally caught up with me all at once. But when I stepped inside my house and closed the door behind me, the silence felt different this time. Not heavy, not empty, focused. I realized I had a choice. I could crumble under their accusations, or I could stand up straight and remind them that being 68 did not mean I was blind, frail, or ready to be erased. I turned on the kitchen light and pulled out my planner. If Jenna wanted to treat me like a woman losing her grip on reality, I would show her just how firmly I still held it. The next morning, I scheduled a full cognitive evaluation with my doctor. I told him everything, every strange comment, every uncomfortable suggestion Jenna had made. He listened carefully and ran a series of tests that required more patience than effort. When he told me my results were perfectly healthy, I felt a wave of relief wash through me. Not because I feared dementia, but because I finally had proof that the problem wasn't in my mind, it was in theirs. I found an attorney of my own that same week, Thomas Reed, a calm man with clear eyes and the kind of patience that comes from decades of sorting out family disputes. When I explained what happened, he didn't look surprised. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly, as if fitting pieces together. "Elder financial abuse usually starts quietly," he said, "but it doesn't stay quiet for long." With his guidance, I updated my trust, added protective clauses, and tightened every legal boundary I had. He suggested we bring in a private investigator to learn more about Jenna's history, and though the idea unsettled me, something in my chest told me it was necessary. That's how I met Linda Park. Linda had a steady gaze and an instinct for truth that bordered on uncanny. Within weeks, she uncovered things I never would have imagined, old debts Jenna had never paid, a previous relationship with a wealthy older man that ended in a settlement, and messages she'd written years ago about using marriage as an upgrade path. Those words alone were enough to make my stomach twist. But what shook me most was the recent text thread Linda found between Jenna and a friend from her real estate office. There, in short, careless messages. Jenna described me as the last piece, hinted that I was slipping mentally, and wrote that once the house in Harbor Crest was secured, she and Michael would be set for life. I sat at my dining table reading those words over and over. The woman who hugged me in my kitchen, who called me Mom, who brought muffins on Sunday mornings. She'd never been building a family. She'd been building a trap. And it wasn't finished yet. Because only days later, Jenna called to say she wanted to come by with a different attorney, someone who could help tidy up the trust so things would be less confusing. The moment she said it, I knew. The next move would be hers. But the counter move, that would be mine. When Jenna returned to my home with her so-called attorney, the sky had the low, heavy look of weather deciding whether to break. Michael followed them in, shoulders slumped, eyes weary, as if he sensed a storm he couldn't name. I welcomed them inside with a calmness that unsettled Jenna. She scanned my face for fear or hesitation and found none, only a steadiness she didn't recognize. The attorney wasted no time. Papers appeared across my kitchen table like props in a performance he had rehearsed too many times. He spoke quickly, using phrases meant to soothe while concealing intent: streamlined management, simplified ownership, protection. Jenna hovered behind him, radiating impatience, nudging Michael's arm every time he hesitated. I nodded politely, letting them believe their plan was unfolding exactly as they hoped. When the attorney slid the pen toward me, Jenna straightened as though witnessing a coronation. Her smile stretched too wide, too eager. Michael watched me with a tightness in his jaw I hadn't seen since he was a boy trying to hide guilt after breaking something precious. Instead of confronting them, I rose to pour coffee. That small pause unsettled Jenna more than open resistance ever could. I carried the mugs back to the table, placing one in front of Michael. His fingers brushed mine, a silent question trembling beneath his touch. I gave him nothing. Not yet. I signed the papers the imposter presented, moving slowly, as though unfamiliar with the weight of a pen. He mistook deliberate restraint for frailty and gathered the documents with triumphant relief in that brief moment. What he didn't know was that every signature rested on copies lacking the notarization required to bind anything at all. He also didn't know my real attorney, Thomas Reed, waited in the next room with a recording device capturing every coercive phrase. Nor did he know Linda Park had compiled months of evidence exposing Jenna's intentions with a clarity denial couldn't blur anymore. 2 days later, their final move arrived in the form of a moving truck rumbling into my driveway at Harbor Crest. Jenna stepped out first, radiating triumph, waving the fraudulent documents as if they were sacred. She ordered the movers around with the confidence of someone convinced the world had already bent to her will. But her certainty began to waver when I arrived not alone, but prepared. Thomas pulled up moments later, stepping out with the steady calm of a man ready to dismantle a lie piece by piece. He greeted the security guard, then turned to Jenna, asking politely to see the documents she claimed transferred ownership. The color drained from her face as he pointed out every flaw, the missing seals, the formatting inconsistencies, the invalid witnessing. Her confidence collapsed in real time. Then the investigator from the district attorney's office arrived, carrying the final blow. He presented the recorded conversation, the text messages Jenna had sent, the financial patterns revealing her intentions with clarity. Jenna's protest died in her throat as the officer read her rights. When the handcuffs closed around her wrists, she looked at me with disbelief, as if betrayal were something she could feel. Michael stood beside the truck, frozen by the truth unraveling in front of him. When Jenna was driven away, he turned to me with tears gathering in his eyes, the weight of realization settling hard. He whispered that he hadn't known, that he never meant to hurt me. I touched his arm gently, not to comfort him, but to steady him. Awareness, though late, mattered. In the weeks that followed, Michael moved into a small apartment and began piecing his life back together. He started therapy, faced truths he had long avoided, and found his footing again. I returned to my routines, my trust secure, my home intact, my sense of self restored. Standing on my balcony at Harbor Crest, I realized Jenna took nothing from me. She clarified truth,